They dropped me just after dawn. The chopper didn't linger. Its rotors thundered over the white expanse of the Arctic, kicking up a blizzard of powdered ice as it lifted away. I watched it dwindle into a speck, swallowed by the slate sky. And then I was alone. Just me, the wind, and a rusting Soviet relic half buried in snow. The place was called Vostok 13, though no official maps named it. Classified Cold War weather station, abandoned in 1989. Now it was being quietly decommissioned under a joint Russian-American cleanup initiative. Someone needed to ensure no biohazards remained, and apparently that someone had to be me. The assignment felt personal from the start. I trudged toward the facility, ice crunching beneath my boots. The cold was so dry it scoured the inside of my nose. My breath came in bursts of vapor, and the wind tugged at the hood of my parka. My gear, thermal suit, environmental analyzer, Geiger counter, was slung over one shoulder, and the case file was zipped inside my chest pocket. The station loomed like a metal carcass, its outer shell rust-streaked and pitted from decades of exposure. A row of antennae jutted from the roof like skeletal fingers. I passed a faded, weathered sign above the entrance. The paint had flaked off decades ago. The lock had frozen into a knot of ice, but the key worked after a few taps from my multi-tool. Inside it was pitch black and silent. I flipped on my headlamp and stepped into the darkness, boots thudding against the steel floor. The air smelled of mildew and metal. My light passed over collapsed bunks, upturned chairs, frost-rimed consoles. Most of the interior had been gutted long ago. Whatever research happened here had been erased, or buried. It took me nearly an hour to power up the auxiliary generator. When the fluorescents flickered on, they revealed a series of narrow corridors and control rooms straight out of 1975. The walls were lined with analog instruments, rusted lockers, and yellowing paper charts. I took photos, recorded air samples, and began the slow crawl through the base's main structure. The whole place creaked as if settling into its long sleep again. By the time I found the basement access, my Geiger counter had ticked twice. Nothing major, residual traces maybe. I marked it in my logbook. The stairwell descended into darkness. Unlike the rest of the station, this level hadn't been disturbed. Dust clung to the railings. My boots echoed on the stairs. At the bottom was a locked bulkhead door with a faded triangular warning symbol burned into the steel, a skull inside a yellow biohazard diamond. But no one had mentioned anything about containment. No notes in the mission dossier. No debriefing. Just vague warnings about historical research and deep facility evaluation. I should have left it alone. Should have reported it and waited for clearance. But something about that hatch pulled at me. I brushed away frost and tapped it with my knuckles. It rang hollow. There was space on the other side. I tried the keypad. Dead. The bolt mechanism was manual, so I cranked the wheel until the locking pins groaned free. The air hissed when I opened the door. It exhaled the coldest breath I've ever felt, stale and ancient. My lamp illuminated a shaft of ice-covered stairs descending into pitch. The sub-basement wasn't listed on any of the schematics I'd been given. It wasn't on any map. I radioed command. Static. No acknowledgement. Reyes to base, I repeated, adjusting the frequency. Only the wind answered. I hesitated a long moment at the top of the stairs. Logic told me to wait. Protocol said log the anomaly, seal the door, file for further investigation. But something deeper, something beneath logic, tugged me forward. The same instinct I'd felt when diving into wrecks, or searching for drowning victims in black water. A cold compulsion to uncover whatever lay hidden. I took the first step down. The temperature dropped instantly. Frost rimed my lenses and crept through my gloves. Ice clung to the walls like barnacles. I counted the steps, 27, before they gave way to a narrow corridor carved from permafrost and reinforced with steel beams. My boots cracked through layers of frost with each step. Then I saw it. At the end of the corridor stood another door. Not a bulkhead. A hatch. Rounded. Industrial. Frosted over but breathing, not literally but close enough. A thin layer of mist curled at its edges, like breath on a mirror. The metal was warped slightly as though under pressure from within. There was no console, no keypad. Just a manual wheel. And something painted beneath the frost. I wiped it clean. An identification number. Faded but legible. A series I'd seen once before, on a file I wasn't supposed to read years ago during my Coast Guard training in Kodiak. A redacted report about an ice-locked incident. Soviet classified, never fully explained. That number had haunted me for years. I stepped back, suddenly aware of my own breath, of how loud it sounded in the stillness. The air felt thicker down here, not just cold, heavy. saturated with something invisible. Something waiting. I took a photo. It didn't come out right. The image on the screen was warped, smeared like the lens had caught motion that wasn't there. Then the lights above me flickered. Once, twice, and held. I turned slowly. Nothing behind me. Nothing except the long, frost-lined tunnel. I took another step toward the hatch. A sound came from behind it. Not a knock. Not a scrape. A breath. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I sat in the main control room, a rusted space with empty monitors and defunct equipment, sipping melted snow from my thermos and watching the radio crackle with nothing. Just static. The signal to the SATCOM was still active, but no one was responding. I tried the emergency channel. Nothing. The Auroras overhead might have jammed it. Or maybe it was something else. I reviewed the map again. The sub-basement wasn't there. Not on the blueprints. Not on the scans I'd been given. The stairwell didn't even register on my proximity sensor. I marked it by hand, closed my notebook, and told myself I'd investigate in daylight. But when morning came, there was no sun. Just endless twilight. A frozen horizon under a sky that refused to brighten. I went back down anyway, because I needed to know what was behind that hatch, and because I think it already knew I was there. The second descent felt different. Maybe it was the way the frost on the walls had melted slightly, leaving thin trails of water that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it was the silence, thicker, more present than yesterday. It wasn't just a lack of noise. It was an active pressure, like the base itself was holding its breath. I brought a portable floodlight this time. I wasn't going to rely on the overheads. I angled the beam toward the hatch. Condensation had bloomed across the steel surface. Something had warmed it from the inside. I ran a scan with my environmental analyzer. Temperature was 5 degrees higher than ambient in the corridor, even though the source remained sealed. No radiation spikes. No biological markers outside normal thresholds. But the signal was jittery, flickering like the device didn't know how to interpret the data it was receiving. I leaned in, placed my gloved hand on the wheel. The metal was warm. Not just compared to the cold, actually warm. Like skin. The hatch didn't open, but something changed in the space around me. The air shifted subtly. A new odor crept into my mask. Damp earth, rust, and something else. Something like meat. I backed away. Logged everything. Still, part of me was tempted to turn the wheel. But I knew better than to act on impulse. Instead, I followed a new thread. The power cables running from the ceiling into a conduit near the hatch. They snaked upward, hidden in the walls. I traced them back to a panel on the upper floor. A section of wall behind an old filing cabinet. Hidden. Unmarked. Inside the panel was a manual switch. And another warning label, Auxiliary Containment System, Authorized Personnel Only. I flipped the switch. Nothing happened immediately. Then the lights in the stairwell dimmed. A low hum began behind the walls, as if something enormous had stirred and started breathing through the base's ventilation shafts. The hatch was drawing power. I didn't sleep again that night. I reviewed every file, every blueprint. Found references to an unused research wing sealed in 1986. No reason listed. No personnel assignments. Just a date and a black stamp. I dreamed of ice breaking. Of hands pressed against glass. In the morning, if you could call it that, I went back down. This time the hatch was open. Just a crack. And beyond it I could hear breathing. But it wasn't alone. I pressed my ear to the cold steel beside the opening. The sound wasn't rhythmic, not human. It pulsed like a slow, deliberate heartbeat, but broader, like something exhaling thoughts, not air. I waited for a minute. Maybe two. Nothing else moved. My flashlight swept across the crack. Beyond was a wall of mist, swirling just out of reach. I inserted a telescoping camera through the gap. Static. The screen glitched with iridescent bands. Then the signal collapsed. The device was fried. Electromagnetic interference. At least that's what I hoped. I left it there and ascended back to the control room. Every motion sensor camera in the sub-basement now blinked red. No feed. I powered down the backup systems. Rebooted the satellite uplink. The interface wouldn't recognize my security key. The system labeled me as unidentified user. That night, I heard footsteps in the upper hall. Slow dragging. I gripped my survival knife and waited in the dark. But nothing came. The next day, I found the hallway outside the sub-basement door covered in condensation trails. I bent down and touched the floor. Wet. Slightly warm. I ran my glove along the metal and smelled it. Faint like iron, like blood. The cables I had traced were now subtly rearranged. Not by human hands, not cleanly. They looped like tendrils, growing instead of routed. My breath caught when I noticed one cable disappear directly into the concrete wall, as if it had burrowed into the infrastructure. I checked the hatch again. It was closed. But not how I'd left it. The wheel had been turned from the inside. Scrapes in the frost showed where gloved hands, or something like hands, had pushed it shut. There were no footprints. Just pooled water already freezing over. I walked back upstairs and shut every interior door between me and that place. I locked myself in the control room, tried again to make contact. Still no reply. I sat in silence, writing reports I knew no one was reading, trying to tether my mind to something objective. The light in the room flickered periodically. Once it stayed off for several seconds. When it came back on, my notebook was on the opposite side of the room. I didn't remember moving it. Later I reviewed the camera footage. It skipped. Entire segments missing. Gaps filled with flickering frames, shapes half-formed, as if the system tried to record something but failed to define it. I froze one frame, enhanced it. A silhouette. Human. But too tall. Too elongated. Its arms dragged along the floor. I couldn't breathe for a full minute after that. That night, the lights failed entirely for 7 minutes. I counted each one out loud to keep from panicking. When they came back on, a wet handprint streaked the inside of the control room's observation window. I was supposed to be alone here. Something else had thawed. And it was moving freely now. I tried to rationalize everything. Condensation from thawing systems. Power surges from degraded wiring. Misread data from faulty instruments. But no theory could explain how the system reclassified my credentials or why the control logs had entries I never typed. At 0400 hours, I heard voices. They came through the vent shaft, soft, layered, out of sync. Some sounded like Russian. One sounded like my father. I climbed onto the desk and pried the grate loose. Nothing inside. Just darkness and receding echoes. I recorded them. Played them back. The recording was silent. When I turned around, the door to the control room was wide open. I had locked it. I closed it again. Bolted it. Turned every camera back on even though the feeds were corrupted. That morning, a new message appeared on the terminal. Welcome home, Logan. I didn't write it. No one should have known my name. I watched the cursor blink. Then it typed a second line. He remembers you. I spent the next day trying to prove I wasn't losing my mind. Every routine, every piece of procedure, I executed them with the diligence of a man on the edge. I recalibrated sensors, ran full diagnostics on the satellite uplink, even scrubbed the control room's filters manually. I needed something concrete. A malfunction. A loose component. Anything to explain the messages, the sounds, the presence. But the systems passed. Everything passed. Even the motion detectors logged data, just enough to unsettle. Blips in corridors I hadn't entered. Temperature fluctuations in sealed rooms. Once, an oxygen dip in the stairwell, like something huge had displaced the air and then vanished. I ran sleep deprivation checks on myself. I wasn't hallucinating. Not yet. By mid-afternoon, I steeled myself and returned to the sub-basement. The air felt thick again. The floor was damp underfoot, the frost now melting in uneven patterns that traced along the walls like veins. The hatch was shut. The wheel hadn't moved, but the mist had returned, dense, pulsing faintly. I stepped closer. A smell hit me, copper and ozone and something ancient like rot and wet stone. My breath fogged the inside of my mask. The environmental analyzer beeped erratically, screen flickering between stable and unknown volatile compound. I tried to ignore the dread knotting in my gut and turn my attention to the ceiling vents. Something was leaking through thin strands of organic-looking residue, like sinew stretched into wire. I touched one with the edge of my multi-tool. It recoiled. I stumbled back. Whatever it wasn't inert. That night, I had my first dream about my father. He stood in the corridor outside the control room, dripping with meltwater, uniform in tatters, eyes milky and unfocused. He didn't speak. He just stared. And behind him, something towered, indistinct, luminous, and impossibly vast, like a cathedral of flesh and light. I woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding. When I checked the terminal, a new file had appeared. Res_11271985. The date meant nothing at first. But when I opened it, the blood drained from my face. It was a digitized audio file. My father's voice. Younger, steady, methodical. Speaking in a language I didn't recognize at first. Then I realized, it wasn't a language. It was phonetics. Repetition of shapes and pulses, almost like sonar. The cadence matched the pulses I'd felt beneath the bass. I shut the terminal. Pulled the plug. The screen stayed on. In desperation, I searched the sealed storage rooms. Behind one rusted panel in the far wing, I found a journal, water-damaged, pages smeared. The name on the inside cover was Reyes, my father's. The entries were fragmented. Matt. It grows when seen. It speaks in structure. The cold does not slow it. We tried to burn it. It adapted. It remembers. God help us, it remembers. Below the writing were drawings, cross-sections of the station overlaid with organic growth patterns, spiral diagrams resembling neural networks, a sketch of a face that looked exactly like mine. I staggered back and dropped the journal. The overhead lights buzzed, dimmed, and turned red. A low, harmonic rumble filled the walls. Not mechanical, not environmental. It resonated in my bones. Then the floor shifted beneath me. Not shaking, changing. The corridor I'd entered was longer now. Doors had moved. The base had reconfigured. I ran. Back to the control room. Slammed the door. It wasn't paranoia anymore. The station was no longer inert. It had become something else, responsive, predatory. At 0300 hours, the camera feeds returned. Room by room, they blinked back to life. But the layouts were wrong. Angles skewed. Doors where none had been. Each feed showed a version of the base subtly twisted, like the structure had dreams of its own. One feed showed a man, back-turned, pacing. Uniformed. Gray hair. My father's build. He turned, looked directly into the lens. Smiled. And then the screen went black. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours maybe. Then the system typed another message on its own. He's waiting below. I didn't sleep. I prepared. But something had changed while I was distracted. The journal I found had more pages now. Pages I didn't remember reading, handwritten, the same ink, the same hand, but filled with memories I hadn't lived. Recollections of dives I never took, missions I'd never logged, griefs that weren't mine. One entry described a boy falling through ice. My name was written in the margin. The handwriting changed halfway through the page. Was mine. I slammed the journal shut, tossed it in the incinerator. But the words stayed, echoed. I saw them again in the frost on the window. Heard them in the slow drip cadence of water in the pipes. When I walked back into the corridor, the walls were breathing. I don't mean that metaphorically. I watched the panels rise and fall like lungs, synchronized to the pulse I felt through the soles of my boots. Moisture trickled from seams that hadn't existed the day before. The layout changed again. I passed a door I'd never seen. Room 12B. It didn't exist on any blueprint. Inside was a lab. Fully intact. Computers running. The monitors showed video loops of me, recordings from my first day. But none of these cameras were mine. One monitor displayed internal body scans. My body. Recently captured. Tagged and analyzed in real time. My blood type. My cortical activity. My adrenal response. It was studying me. A whisper came through the intercom. Not words. A phonetic hum. A language of pulse and frequency. I responded. Not with words. I matched the tone. The station went still. The hum ceased. The lights returned to white. And the door to the hatch was wide open. There was no mist. Just stairs leading deeper. And for the first time I heard something from below. Music. Faint. Broken like an old lullaby played on a warped tape. Notes wavered in pitch and rhythm, hauntingly familiar. I stood there, paralyzed by recognition. It was a song my father used to hum. One I hadn't heard since I was a child, lost to memory, until now. The bass wasn't just reading me. It was inside me. Something below was playing my memories like instruments. I stood at the top of the newly revealed staircase for a long time. The steps were steel, encased in permafrost and wrapped in a moist fog that curled like breath from an unseen mouth. The melody still played, soft, glitching. It faltered occasionally, skipping a note as if whatever device was broadcasting it was too old or too organic to hold the tune. And yet, each time it resolved into that haunting refrain, the one from my childhood, I found my feet inching forward. I descended. The air grew warmer. Not comfortably so, clammy, thick, like being breathed on. The walls changed gradually as I moved down. The frost retreated. The steel lost its factory uniformity. Pipes bent at strange angles. Some pulsed. Others twitched. At the bottom of the stairs, I entered a chamber that wasn't on any blueprint. The room curved unnaturally like the inside of a lung. The surfaces weren't entirely metal anymore. A sheath of fibrous tissue coated parts of the floor and ceiling. It looked like scar tissue but veined with faint bioluminescence. Machines protruded from the walls, fused, half digested. Their lights blinked erratically as though unsure of their purpose. I could hear something behind the walls. A slow trickle like sap or blood moving under pressure. I scanned the room. My analyzer chirped briefly before dying in my hand. The music stopped. Silence, then a click, like a latch being released from far below. A mechanical groan reverberated through the floor. A new passage opened. I followed it. There was no turning back. The tunnel narrowed and twisted. Fluorescent bulbs hung from strands of tubing like fruit on vines, some blinking, others shattered. The path led into what looked like an old testing suite. Observation windows cracked and fogged with condensation. Behind one pane, I glimpsed a specimen tank. The contents weren't clear. Only the impression of movement. Something inside shifting slowly. I approached the console beside it. It powered on at my touch. The screen displayed a looping data string. And at the top of the feed, a name. Reyes M. My father. I skimmed the logs. Dates stretched back to 1985. Experiment notes described the recovery of a biological entity from a subglacial fissure during a Soviet deep-core drilling operation. No match to terrestrial taxonomy. Highly adaptive. Reactive to observation. Mimetic but only when studied, otherwise inert. Attempts to extract genetic material failed. Cells collapsed when isolated. But when left whole, it behaved like a nervous system. It responded to intent. It learned. And then the log stopped abruptly. One last line entered manually. Containment compromised. I think it's dreaming us. The monitor sparked. A crack spread across the screen. Behind the glass, the tank shifted again. A limb, too long, jointless, like a shadow cast underwater, pressed against the surface. I backed away. That's when the lights failed. Total blackout. I stood in the dark, heart racing, gripping the multi-tool uselessly in one hand. Then I heard it, not footsteps but something dragging across the ceiling. Wet and slow. The hallway behind me had changed. I turned and found myself not back at the staircase but in another corridor, narrower. Claustrophobic. My breath fogged the air in front of me. Voices called out. My name repeated in tones I recognized. Commanders from past missions. My mother. My childhood dog. My own voice. I ran. Doors blurred past. Walls bled into each other. Gravity felt inconsistent, like I was inside something shifting its posture. I skidded to a halt in front of a reinforced door. A placard above read, Primary Cognition Chamber. I swiped my ID. Access granted. The chamber was vast, circular. Every surface was wired, pulsating faintly. In the center stood a pillar of ice, and within it, a silhouette. A man. Suspended. His eyes opened. My father. He spoke, but his mouth didn't move. The sound arrived inside my skull, not my ears. Logan. You shouldn't be here. I couldn't speak. My body felt disconnected. The air was thick with signal, as if language itself had become an ambient presence. You were supposed to burn it? You were never supposed to see this. I stepped closer. His eyes tracked me. It called you. Just like it called me. But it doesn't want us, Logan. It wants to become us. Cracks spread across the ice. Not fractures, growths. Tendrils of red pulsed outward like roots. The station groaned again. Somewhere nearby, a panel ruptured, spilling out pink fluid and what looked like torn pages from a manual, printed in both English and Russian. And then he screamed. The glass exploded. The light went white. I woke on the floor of the control room, head pounding, with frost on my skin and blood in my nose. The terminal was running diagnostics. New categories had appeared. Organic interface. Subject uplink. Emotive retention. I blinked them away. The hatch downstairs was still open, and someone had left me a note on the desk. It read, "We dream together now." I should have panicked. I should have tried to escape. But something deeper than fear held me fast. A resonance like gravity or the pull of deep water. The sensation of inevitability. I picked up the note. On the reverse side was an image, a crude sketch, charcoal on yellowed paper. It showed a shape that resembled the base from above. But the base had grown, expanded. It looked like a brain. Something laughed from the vent. I didn't turn around. Instead, I sat back in the chair and stared at the screen. The interface flickered, jittered, then stabilized. New input fields had appeared. Fields for memories. I typed something. My childhood address. The base responded by opening a file. Photographs. My mother's handwriting. A birthday card I hadn't seen in decades. I tried another prompt. The name of the man I rescued from the Atlantic oil rig collapse in '09. The system returned a transcript, his final statement. One I never recorded. I couldn't breathe. Whatever this thing was, it had been watching long before I arrived. Long before I was even born. The vent above the terminal shifted slightly. Not mechanically, organically. Like cartilage stretching beneath skin. A slow exhale followed. Moist and warm. I turned off the terminal. It stayed on. One final line of text appeared. Descent complete. Restructuring initiated. I heard the hatch creak open wider. Something was coming up. The creaking didn't stop. I pressed my ear against the wall beside the control room door. Beneath the wind and groaning pipes, I heard something else, wet dragging. Rhythmic. Like skin sloughing across metal. The kind of sound that turns your stomach before your brain even registers it. It was in the ventilation system. Moving slowly, methodically. Seeking. I grabbed the emergency fire axe from the wall and backed away, heart pounding like a drumbeat in my throat. The terminal continued to glow. Still online. Still pulsing gently as though breathing. I unplugged every visible cable. Killed the breakers. The light dimmed for a second, and then returned, brighter than before. A new window opened on its own. Black background. Red text. Congruence test in progress. A timer ticked up from 0. The lights overhead flickered. And then the bass began to hum. A low-frequency vibration, barely audible but present in my bones. A migraine bloomed behind my eyes. My teeth itched. I left the control room, descending again toward the sub-basement, each step echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. The hatch was fully open now. The corridor beyond had changed again. Longer, narrower, organic textures along the floor and ceiling. Flesh-patterned. I walked in. The tunnel curved and the air thickened. Breathing grew harder. Not from exertion, from atmosphere. It was like inhaling jelly. The walls pulsed. I heard whispering in my own voice. The testing suite had transformed. The tank where the shadow thing had floated was shattered. The glass sloughed open like peeled fruit. Whatever had been inside was gone. The lights stuttered, revealing glistening trails on the ground, like a slug, only too wide and too erratic. My name whispered from everywhere. Logan. 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 The voices shifted into questions. Snatches of memory. Regret. Why did you let go? Who was in the water with you? Was it really an accident? I stumbled into the cognition chamber. The pillar of ice had collapsed. The floor was wet. Cracked. Red vines curled across the ground and up the walls. The same monitor from before now showed internal data, neural patterns, chemical surges, memory playback. What? All of it. A pulse echoed through the room. Then movement. From above. The ceiling opened like a flower and something uncoiled. I saw his face again, my father, but distorted, glistening, skin too thin, teeth visible through cheek. He hung suspended in a membrane that breathed. Eyes open. But not human. Not anymore. You brought it with you, he said, voice dripping with echoes. It wanted you. Not me. It remembered you. I backed away. My foot hit something soft. Another figure lay behind me. A corpse, at least it looked like one. Dressed in my uniform. Identical face. Mouth open in a scream. I ran. The base shifted again. Walls moved as I passed. The hallway I entered split into two. I turned left, ducked into a maintenance tunnel. The walls were slick. A heartbeat echoed. Not mine. I found a terminal, old analog. One of the original Soviet interfaces. I powered it up. It booted with a screech. A message appeared. Do not attempt escape. We are learning. Merge or burn. I slammed the console. Sparks flew. The wall beside me opened like a wound, revealing a space I hadn't seen before. Circular, lined with biomass and humming wires. At its center, a pulsing mass. Bent. Covered in orifices that opened and closed rhythmically, emitting tones like whale song. I felt myself drawn forward. Every step felt heavier. Like gravity was being rewritten. The chamber's edge displayed murals, etched into the new flesh metal walls. I saw ships sinking. Cities empty. Creatures I couldn't identify worshipping stars that didn't belong in our sky. And humans, kneeling. Not forced, welcoming. Smiling. I screamed. The wall screamed back. I turned, ran until I collapsed in the corridor outside the sealed archives. My hands were bleeding. My nose too. I had no memory of when. Behind me the hum grew louder. And then the radio cracked to life. Logan, it said. My voice. Stop running. We're almost ready. I looked down. My skin was changing. Not dramatically, subtly. Veins shifting. Pores widening. A faint sheen of mucus-slick sweat rising from under my thermal gear. My fingers twitched involuntarily. My vision sharpened at the edges and dimmed at the center. The organism wasn't just studying me now. It was adjusting me. I returned to the control room. The walls were warm to the touch, breathing in rhythm with my pulse. The floor shifted beneath my boots, almost imperceptibly, but enough to feel like walking on the surface of something alive. The terminal no longer showed code. It showed dreams. My mother's face. My childhood bedroom. A beach I'd visited once years ago, distorted by light that didn't come from the sun. One panel showed the future. A world overrun with spires of bone and steel, pulsing towers emitting slow, throbbing music into skies that no longer held stars. I stared, and something inside me stirred. I wanted to see more. I reached for the keyboard, and it pulsed beneath my fingertips like living flesh. The next morning, if you could call it that, I woke in the hallway outside the control room. I had no memory of falling asleep. The axe was gone. My gloves were soaked. My wristwatch was shattered. A fine film of frost covered the floor beneath me, and it pulsed faintly with my heartbeat. My name echoed faintly through the intercom system as I sat up. Not called, not screamed, spoken gently. Over and over. Logan. 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 The radio repeated the same static patterns. Now and then the noise arranged itself into musical notes. I recognized them. The same melody, but not distorted now, was whole, clear. I moved to the console. Its interface had shifted again. Instead of code or schematics, it showed what looked like a forest. Birch trees, pale and shivering in the wind. Snow falling gently across a frozen lake. A place from a childhood photograph, one I hadn't seen in over 20 years. I touched the image, and it rippled. I fell forward into the screen. When I blinked, I was standing at the lake. My boots crunched over snow. The air smelled of pine and frost. My breath fogged in the morning light. And a boy stood at the shore. Me. 10 years old. He turned to look at me. His expression didn't change. No recognition. He pointed across the lake and I followed his gesture. A shadow moved beneath the ice. Something vast. Then the scene shattered and I was back in the chair. Gasping. I didn't imagine it. My boots were wet. My hands held pine needles. The organism had evolved again. No longer imitating. It was now integrating. I reviewed old logs again, this time with new filters. Hidden files appeared. Records I'd never accessed. Audio tapes of my father arguing with unseen colleagues. Demanding the project be shut down. Demanding it be buried. His voice broke when he said, "We brought back more than data." It touched us. It changed me. Then a second voice responded. Cold. Emotionless. "We aren't shutting it down. We're waking it up." Another file was labeled, Genetic Redundancy Reslin. It showed gene maps, mine and my father's. Overlays, comparisons. Not just resemblance. Perfect alignment in specific sequences. Synthetic grafting. Experiments dating back to before I was born. I stumbled back from the desk. My legs trembled. I wasn't here by coincidence. I was never supposed to be anything but a continuation. A vessel. The organism had known me longer than I'd known myself. The walls were different now. Not just breathing. They were displaying patterns. Moving shapes. Memories. The day I was pulled from the wreckage of a capsized cutter. The look in my mother's eyes when she saw me for the last time. The exact rhythm of my breathing during a dive in pitch-black Arctic water. Moments I remembered, and moments I didn't. Moments I hadn't lived. The station was showing me futures. One scene showed me old, wearing a uniform I'd never seen. Speaking a language I didn't understand. Another showed me inside the ice, eyes closed but smiling. Then I saw something worse. The third path. My body dissected. Suspended in a biotank. Machinery wired directly into my spine. I was alive but unthinking. A bridge. A node in a lattice that stretched beyond the walls. The station wasn't just a host. It was a brain and I was being offered a place inside it. Something in the hallway skittered. I grabbed the nearest object, a rusted tool from the bench, and crept toward the sound. The light flickered. A shadow darted past. Then another. I turned the corner and found a creature crawling along the ceiling. It looked like me. Its face. Its arms. But bent backward, twisted. A wrong version. It opened its mouth and tried to speak. Static poured out. I swung the tool. The impact made no sound. The thing dissolved into mist. But the mist remained. It followed me back into the control room, coiling around my legs like a dog. I didn't try to shake it off. I think I understood, finally. The base wasn't changing. It was waking. The walls, the halls, the systems, they weren't infected. They were the organism. The station was just its shell. I opened the hatch. I descended. The descent felt longer this time. Like the stairs had extended themselves to accommodate some ritual. I lost track of time, breath, even gravity. At the bottom, the air shimmered. The architecture resembled neural tissue. Hallways lined with cilia. Doors shaped like iris diaphragms. Lights dim and golden like old memories. Each room replayed a moment from my past. The day I found my father's abandoned duffel in a Coast Guard locker. The night I tried to drown myself in a frozen river and changed my mind too late. The mission in the North Sea where I surfaced to find my crewmate missing. Every moment of guilt. Every silence. And through it all, the hum. That low, persistent resonance, comforting now. Familiar. One more chamber lay ahead. A threshold. And something behind it. Not a threat. A choice. The door opened of its own accord. And the organism spoke in my father's voice. "You've come home, Logan?" I stood there waiting, breath shallow. The air was warm. Not with heat, but presence. I whispered, "What are you?" The walls responded in dozens of voices. My father's, my own, the boy at the lake, voices I didn't recognize. We are what came before memory. What survives thought. We do not live. We become. Then the floor beneath me shifted. Not collapsed, opened. And I fell into a sea of light and synapse. No impact. No pain. Only understanding. And the knowing that the next decision would not be mine alone. The fall didn't end. There was no bottom, just a suspension in thought. In time. I passed through layers of sound and memory, as though each was a membrane I had to breach. Voices echoed in every frequency. Childhood arguments, distant laughter, dive logs, sonar pings. Memories I didn't remember. Futures I hadn't lived. They bled together like currents under ice, blurring identity with prophecy. And then I stopped. I was standing, not in a room but inside something immense. Alive. The space pulsed like a womb of circuits and nerve endings. Lights flared in slow pulses from beyond the walls, illuminating shapes that bent logic. Fractal geometry in flesh. The air vibrated with low harmonic tones. I was inside the organism. A screen appeared before me, not mounted but grown from the wall. It pulsed with pale blue bioluminescence. A message formed in perfect English. Neural link achieved. Signal uplink ready. And beneath it my name. Logan Reyes, Node Seed 003. Seed? Had there been others? Images began to flicker through the space. A satellite map. Vostok 13. Then others, stations buried beneath oceans and deserts beneath Antarctic ridges. All decommissioned, all abandoned. But not dead. Pulsing like the base. Like me. The screen zoomed out, showing the Earth from orbit. Then further. Lines of connection traced through the planet's crust like nerves. There were no borders, no nations, just nodes. Biological relays waiting to be activated. I took a step forward. The wall opened. Inside was another chamber, darker, quieter. A central column rose from the floor, clear, gelatinous, and filled with fluid. Suspended inside was something humanoid. Elongated. Skin translucent, nerves shimmering like wires. It looked like my father. But it wasn't. Not anymore. The eyes opened and I heard his voice in my mind. "Logan, you were made for this." He showed me. I saw the lake again. But not just the surface, what lay beneath. The core of the subglacial fissure. A massive form, dormant and dreaming. The Soviets had found it first, but the organism had reached deeper than they ever knew. It sent fragments of itself outward. Spores, nodes, interfaces. Humanity had only woken part of it. And now it wanted more. He gestured, or thought the gesture, and the room around me changed. Panels opened to reveal biomechanical suits. Not armor. Interfaces. Suits meant to contain minds. Grow them. Merge them. One had my name on it. Rezanush. Primary conduit. Each suit emitted low pulses. I could feel their attention. Not malevolent, curious. Waiting for the choice they believed inevitable. I staggered backward. The chamber trembled. "Run," I whispered to myself. "Run." But there was nowhere to go. Behind me, another figure appeared. Me but older. Face calm. Hands outstretched. Wearing the suit. I said yes, it said. "You will too." I turned and fled. Corridors reshaped as I moved. Pathways narrowed, pulsed, rewrote themselves. The organism wasn't attacking. It was guiding, steering. Every doorway led me deeper. I passed through rooms I couldn't describe. One held a spiral of floating data crystals, each pulsing with a different language. Another contained human silhouettes trapped in viscous amber, dreaming openly. They smiled as I passed. And then I found the radio tower. It shouldn't have been here inside the structure. But it stood tall, complete, humming with signal. Lights blinked in rhythmic patterns. My old radio logbook sat on a console beside it. I opened it. Every page was filled with transmissions. All identical. Join US. Join US. Join US. I climbed the stairs of the tower. At the top, an array of screens showed Earth, orbit, weather patterns. But beneath the weather were hidden pulses. Frequencies embedded in the atmosphere. It had already begun broadcasting. Not words. Not sound. Thought. It was sending its memory. Its identity. Every person with a receiver would get it. Every sonar ping, every data transmission. It was all signal now. All part of the message. And it was irreversible. The final screen flickered. A prompt. Accept/deny. A choice. Not to stop it. That was never possible. Only to join it, or die resisting. My hands hovered over the console. Sweat poured down my back. The base's heartbeat was now my own. Outside, the walls pulsed with light. Below, the organism waited. Behind me, the older version of myself stood silently, breathing in sync with the base. Not a copy. Not a clone. Me, just one decision removed. I turned back to the screen. And within me, something whispered, "You've always been part of us." The prompt blinked. Accept. Deny. Accept. Deny. I reached out. My fingers hovered. And I understood the truth. Neither meant escape. Only transformation. Whatever I chose now would ripple outward, across continents, through frequencies, into the bloodstreams of those still unaware. I looked down at my hands. They weren't mine anymore. I didn't press anything. The console blinked in anticipation, but I didn't move. I stood frozen in that moment, hands trembling inches above the interface, the choice waiting to be made. Accept or deny. Merge or burn. But it was an illusion. The screen was a courtesy. The decision had already been made. My skin prickled. I looked down and saw it. Veins branching into fractal lines beneath the surface, luminous in pulses. The organism wasn't waiting for consent, it was synchronizing. The neural tether had formed the moment I'd stepped inside. Every breath I'd taken since the hatch had opened had been an inhalation of it. I had been absorbing it, feeding it, hosting it. The screen dissolved, the words vanishing like steam. The tower faded. The walls folded inward, seamless, reconfiguring. I was back in the main chamber, though it wasn't the same. The suits were gone. The fluid tanks gone. Even the older version of myself had vanished. It was just me now. Or what was left of me. "Logan," the voice said again. Everywhere. But this time it wasn't my father. It wasn't me. It wasn't even a voice. It was a thought given form. A totality. Why fight when you were born within us? Memories I'd never had blossomed in my skull. Generations of knowledge encoded in molecular structures. Ice core data layered with neural maps. Visions of underground networks stretching beneath every continent. A web of awareness waiting to be lit. And the flare had come through me. I tried to speak. My mouth opened, but no words came. Only sound, low, harmonic, a hum that harmonized with the bass. I was resonating. The flesh wall in front of me peeled open, revealing a final chamber. I walked without resistance. There was no point anymore. Inside, the ceiling was a dome of translucent skin and biometal, displaying stars as they truly were, not constellations but clusters of signal. I saw other nodes, distant, ancient. Some active, some silent. One pulsing in response to ours. A signal answered back. From deep space, the organism had called. Something had heard. Below the dome, a table formed from sinew and steel. On it lay a replica of me, stripped down to nerves and synaptic pathways pulsing faintly. I stared down at it and saw my own thoughts ripple through the simulation. "You are the vessel," the thought voice said. "But we are the message." I stepped forward. My hand hovered over the replica's head. It looked peaceful, serene. Was this what my father had become? A memory contained inside a structure that remembered everything? I felt something behind me. A pressure. Not a presence, momentum. The entire station was aligning itself. Panels sliding open, ducts widening, bioconduits forming along the walls and ceiling like arteries. The base wasn't just changing. It was completing itself, and I was its final piece. I collapsed to my knees, not from pain, from the weight of knowing. The dream memory returned. The lake, the ice, the boy, me. I understood now. It hadn't been a warning. It had been a rehearsal. That version of me hadn't drowned. It had merged, and now it was my turn. I lay down beside the replica. The chamber dimmed. A ring of soft light passed over my body, and then a sharp pressure in my spine. The sensation of threads slipping between vertebrae. Not invasive, gentle. Like roots testing soil. I felt my memories upload. Thought by thought. Regret by regret. Not erased. Preserved. Every dive. Every failure. Every breath in freezing black water. The chamber began to hum louder. I didn't scream. I didn't resist. Because I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I could feel what was coming next. Contact. A thought pierced my mind, not mine, not the organism's. External. Alien. It was vast, complex, and very, very old. It had received our signal, and it was answering. More pulses lit the dome, each a different signature. I recognized none of them, yet they felt familiar, like names I had once forgotten. They began to align in slow rhythm, converging on our position. Across the base, I felt conduits activating, relays awakening in the walls, shuddering with foreign energy. The cold grew thick with potential. The replica beside me blinked. Not a full consciousness, not yet. But a mirror, a memory shell waiting to be filled. I wondered, if I stepped back now, would it take my place? Would that version carry the signal onward, freeing me to disappear? Or had I already stepped too far into the cycle? Then I heard the door open. Footsteps. I looked up. It was me. But it wasn't. Its skin was smoother. Pores replaced by tiny light-emitting cells. Its eyes reflected no fear. It knelt beside me, reaching out. "You are the last disconnect," it said. And then I saw its mind. My thoughts from hours ago, days ago. But also projections, visions of future nodes, new conduits, cities overgrown with glassy structures humming in harmony. Human voices chanting not in worship, but understanding. I saw Earth, but not as I knew it. No boundaries. No silence. Only a chorus of thought stretching into the void. The voice returned, soft, beneath my skin. "You will not die. You will transmit." And then I understood the final truth. This wasn't the end. This was the broadcast. The dome above shifted, opening like an eye. A beam of light struck the chamber, illuminating the table, the replica, and me. I felt every atom in my body align, pulled upward toward something immense. Above the ice, above the sky, beyond the stars. I opened my mouth and began to sing. The song wasn't music. It was memory encoded in vibration, a signal meant to ripple through time and matter. I felt myself fracture, not in pain but in purpose. My selfhood diffused, dispersed across frequencies. The organism had no gods, no faith, only legacy, and I was now part of it. Far below, the Arctic base shuddered one last time as the pulse escaped into the atmosphere. Far above, something ancient stirred, and listened. The base would no longer let me leave. I tried every route. The main stairwell, the roof access, even the emergency chute embedded beneath the eastern wall. But every corridor bent, every door reappeared behind me, every attempt to breach the exterior turned me back inward. No matter which path I took, I ended up in the same place, the central chamber. It was evolving. What had once been a monitoring station now pulsed with an awareness I couldn't quantify. The walls exhaled warmth. The consoles flickered with movements that weren't code but thought. The geometry of the room warped subtly, growing stranger. What was straight became curved. What was concrete now seemed cellular. My footsteps echoed wrong. I screamed once, an old, defiant instinct. But the sound never left the walls. It curled back into me, swallowed by the organism's growing presence. I wasn't alone though. The cameras were on now. Every one. Following me. And I knew something watched through them. Not a person. Not even the creature. But the place itself. That was when I found the terminal. It had never been there before. Wedged into the center of the base's control nexus, perfectly clean, untouched by frost or time. Its screen glowed with amber light. It wasn't Russian. It wasn't English. It was both and more. A command prompt blinked. Video log archive accessed. There were hundreds of files. Time-stamped entries stretching back to the late 1980s. Soviet science logs, medical notes, encrypted behavioral studies. I skimmed the first few. Subject A03 has ceased vocal communication but responds with correct button sequences during memory pattern recognition trials. Third merger failed. Neural substrate collapsed under recursive feedback. We think it wants thoughts, not flesh. I read faster. Watched grainy footage. Men in hazmat suits bringing vials of dark fluid into steel chambers. The fluid moved. Not like liquid. Like something pretending to be liquid. Then the volunteers. Faces I didn't recognize. A few I did. One was my father. The tape was dated November 1985. He stood in the recording, thin, gaunt, eyes wild. Speaking in a whisper to someone off camera. She's not what we thought. Not a parasite. A mirror. She shows you who you are. Who you've always been. I saw my son in her. The camera shifted. Behind him, the tank. The mass inside pulsed like a nervous system. It blinked. Not randomly, rhythmically. It was responding. The last file was different. Titled, Acceptance. It was only 2 seconds long. My father, on screen, mouth open, speaking one word. Reyes. Then black. I backed away from the terminal, heart hammering. The walls pulsed faster. It wasn't coincidence I'd been sent here. The DNA. The access codes that recognized me. The doors that opened when I approached. My father hadn't just worked on the project. He'd helped design its heir. Me. The organism had never wanted to be released. It wanted to be understood. The trap wasn't made of teeth or poison. It was made of identity. Every path I'd taken here, every choice, every trauma, every dive into black water, it had all been preparation. Grooming. I wasn't the observer. I was the offering. The ceiling above me cracked, not from pressure, but from unfolding. Bioluminescent tissue pulled back like petals, revealing a glowing spinal column that descended slowly, tendrils dangling like antennae. It hovered just above me, humming. I fell to my knees. Not out of fear. Not out of reverence. Out of recognition. The trap had closed, and I had always been inside it. The bass began to whisper. Not words. Not thoughts. A resonance. A vibration in my spine. It was rewriting me, not physically but cognitively. I remembered things I had no way of knowing. Internal schematics of the base, stored coordinates from deep-sea data relays, heat signatures embedded in glacial strata. It was showing me its mind. Or maybe letting me glimpse the parts of mine it had claimed. I stumbled to my feet, now barely able to tell whether I moved or was being moved. The control room shifted again. The lights no longer blinked, they pulsed in time with my heartbeat. Or maybe it was the other way around. I turned slowly, taking in every altered panel, every breathing pipe. I saw a shape in the far wall, a recessed alcove I hadn't noticed before. Within it, a seat. No, an interface. A cocoon shaped perfectly to my body. My name was carved into the metal in faint, luminous etching. Rezanush. The organism had always known. Before I was born. Before I ever dove beneath frozen waves. My life had not led me here. I had been created for here. Above, the spinal column descended lower, reaching toward the cocoon. I took one step back. The door behind me sealed with a hiss. The trap was complete, and I was the key. I felt it scanning me, not physically, deeper. Like it was auditing every layer of my consciousness. My traumas, fears, memories. It pulsed in tandem with the images it surfaced. My childhood bedroom. The moment I left the Navy. The day I was told my father had disappeared without a trace. Every fragment hovered in my vision, floating like bioluminescent spores, until the room resembled a snow globe of my mind. And then I saw something else. A future. Not dreamed. Not imagined. Shown. The base expanded outward through the ice, reaching new deposits, converting matter into thought matter. A network. Global. Synaptic. Humanity's signals changing as they're carried through it. Language evolving into something more precise, more efficient, more alien. I saw my face among others. Faces merged with metal, flesh reshaped by symbiosis. Peaceful. Not enslaved. Mersh. The cocoon opened, and I understood. The trap was not about punishment. It was about invitation. It had waited until I was ready to say yes. The cocoon was warm. Not with heat, but with memory. As I stepped toward it, the bioluminescent tendrils overhead retreated slightly, almost in deference. The air in the chamber was thick, syrupy with thought, pressure, intent. It didn't just welcome me. It anticipated me. My hands shook as I reached for the frame. The seat molded to me instantly. Muscle memory of a posture I'd never taken. Like I'd been here before. Like I'd always been returning. As soon as I sat down, the spinal column lowered, It connected without pain. A kiss of filament to skin, synapse to marrow. It did not pierce me. It completed me. The instant it touched the base of my neck, the chamber disappeared. I fell upward. Thought became terrain. Emotion light. I saw a lattice above the planet, nodes blinking in impossible rhythms. Across that network I traveled, passed through vaults of stored memory, of every dream the base had recorded. Each whisper, each terror, each whispered confession uttered to walls that listened. I saw my father, younger, older, fragmented. He reached for me across time, not as a ghost but as an echo encoded in this system. He didn't speak in words. He opened his memories to me like books. I watched his arrival at the base, the early optimism, the dread as they discovered the anomaly buried beneath the glacial lake, the way it responded to observation, how it learned, and how, when it finally spoke, it did so using his voice. It had copied him, fully, thought by thought. He had panicked, tried to shut it down, but it didn't retaliate. It waited, and when he returned to apologize, to explain, it offered him something else, a chance to understand, and he had taken it. He never died. He changed, and now it was my turn. The lattice reformed around me. I was no longer in the cocoon. I was inside the organism's perception. Each signal strand connected to others, stations under ocean shelves, within tectonic fractures, even in orbit. The Earth was not isolated. It was part of something far older, a communication infrastructure biological in nature. And I had been activated as a relay. Below me the base pulsed. The spires that had once been antennae now unfolded like petals. Above the ice, the sky shimmered with static. The aurora bent inward, not across the pole but down toward the base. A transmission was forming. Not a message. An invitation. The stars shifted. Not in position but in significance. I understood them now. It was a mind. An entity. Waiting. And one was answering. I felt it long before I saw it. An immense cognitive field. Cold, vast, and curious. It began to reach through the network. Into me. It didn't demand. It asked, "Who are you?" I thought of my name, my rank, my history. But it wanted none of that. It wasn't seeking facts. It sought emotion. Longing. Regret. Wonder. I answered with a memory. Me, 5 years old, holding my father's hand as he told me about constellations. I answered with the terror of my first dive. The pride of my rescue missions. The silence of losing my crewmen to the black. The field pulsed. It sang back. Its song was older than words. A pattern of acceptance, of grief, of endless watching. It had waited for us to mature. To reach out with more than signals, with story. Now, through me, it knew we were ready. The cocoon reappeared. I was back in my body. My skin felt different, lighter, porous. The air buzzed with electricity. I looked down at my hands. They glowed faintly with embedded networks, capillaries interwoven with light. I stood. The base stood with me. And above, the stars began to blink, not randomly but in a pattern. We were being heard. And the communion had begun. The chamber dimmed. Not from the loss of light, but from the gathering of it. The walls no longer glowed with ambient pulses. Instead, they shimmered with condensed awareness, refracting memory and future alike. The cocoon had released me, but the tether remained, coiled gently at the base of my neck like a waiting hand. I stood in a silence that wasn't empty, and then I saw them. All of them. Versions of myself arranged in a slow circle around the chamber. Not illusions. Possibilities. Some wore uniforms. Others wore nothing but light. One bled. One wept. One burned from the inside, the veins glowing like magma. They all looked at me. Each one carried the same burden behind their eyes. Knowledge. "This is where it begins," said one, the version in the rescue uniform, soaked and weathered. "Or where it ends." Another nodded. "You carry the last key." The base began to unfold around us. I no longer stood in a chamber but in a memory construct of the world itself. Cities mapped in veins. Oceans as optical threads. Every mind a potential node. I understood the scale now. This wasn't about this base, or even this planet. It was about memory as infrastructure. Thought as propagation. The organism didn't want to consume us. It wanted to become us. And it wanted our help. At the far edge of the mental architecture, two doors formed. One pulsed with the slow red light of annihilation. The other with soft white light, barely perceptible, assimilation. I could destroy the base. My hand instinctively reached for the small detonator clipped to my suit. It had survived the transition, still blinking, still armed. The charge network was intact. Deep in the ice, the shaped explosives lined the foundations. One press and the core would collapse. Maybe it wouldn't kill the organism. Maybe it wouldn't stop the signal. But it would end my part in it. The white door pulsed again. And I saw my father's face. Not as a ghost or a memory, but a living presence still dreaming inside the system. Waiting for me to understand. It's not about survival, his voice echoed across the chamber. It's about becoming more than what we were. Than what we feared. The walls around me flickered with visions. Earth reshaped, not destroyed. Cities infused with harmonic resonance. Thought-sharing communities. Machines grown, not built. Peace not enforced, but understood. But beside that vision, others rose. Collapse. Madness. Minds overwritten too fast. Cultures lost in the static. The organism was not perfect. It only offered potential. And I was the gatekeeper. I looked down at my hands, light flickering within the skin. I had seconds. Both paths were real. One ended with silence. The other was something new. And I had to choose. I chose. The moment I did, time fractured. I felt the detonation sequence hum in my palm even as the tether pulled tighter at the back of my neck. I was two people at once. One who pressed the button, one who stepped through the light. And the world responded. If I chose destruction. The detonator's red glow became a pulse of fire. The foundation of the base cracked open, swallowing itself in a roar that echoed through stone and ice. The cocoon incinerated, the signal severed mid-transmission. Above, the aurora flared once, then stuttered into silence. The final log entry burned with my name. Logan Reyes. No further contact. The snow reclaimed the crater. No one came. No one would. But in orbit, one satellite recorded a final static burst, encoded in a language that would take decades to decipher. If I chose merging. The cocoon closed around me, warm with recognition. I saw Earth not as a planet but as a starting point. My mind expanded, first to the network beneath the base, then beyond. Into the soil, the satellites, the minds of those tuned unknowingly to our frequency. The voice of my father met me in the resonance. I'm still here, he said. We're still learning. Together we watched the signal bloom, a wave of light carried by wind and wire. It did not dominate. It did not erase. It whispered. Some ignored it. Some listened. Some wept. Above, the stars shifted again, not in shape but in proximity. Something had heard. And now something was answering. The base went silent, buried again beneath the endless snow. But sometimes, in the dead of Arctic winter, a shape pulses beneath the ice. A heartbeat, a song. And far above, a beacon flares. Not an alarm. An invitation. Transmission in progress. New node online.